Hi everyone, and welcome to my webinar on developing early literacy, easy everyday practices for parents, librarians, teachers, and caregivers. My name is Jennifer Sullivan, and I've worked in youth services in the public library setting for a little over 7 years. I currently work as a children's library associate at a very busy suburban branch. And for 3 years before that, I was an early literacy outreach specialist and used to average 15 story times a week at different daycare and preschool settings. And also in that capacity, I used to help give trainings on early literacy and story time at conferences for child care workers and teachers. And I have adapted this presentation from one I used to give to that, but I have broken it down into two different presentations and made this one focus just on early literacy and broadened it to include things that parents would also do at home. In addition to working at the library and e-services, I also blog about e-services, which may be how you came across this webinar. And if not, you can check my blog out at adventuresinstorytime.com. Some of the topics that we're going to cover are first defining what early literacy is and what it is not. We'll talk about some of the different skills that make up early literacy and the everyday practices that you can all do at home or wherever you are to develop early literacy. And then we'll go over a few tips for selecting books for different age groups and for reading aloud. And I'll talk about things that your library can do for you and a few other resources. Now, first of all, what is early literacy? Well, I like to start by first defining what it is not. And early literacy is absolutely not trying to teach young children to read. I know a lot of parents and childcare workers get a little freaked out when they first hear us talk about early literacy, thinking that we are expecting them to teach 2 and 3-year-olds to read, and that is absolutely not the case. What early literacy is providing the foundation for learning to read later when they're developmentally ready. And this is usually somewhere between ages 5 to 7. So early literacy is basically what children know about language and the written word before they are ready to learn to read, and it provides the building blocks to prepare them for learning to read later when they are ready. Now, these are some of the early literacy skills: oral language and narrative skills, which is being able to communicate verbally, understanding what words mean, being able to relate information, tell a story, follow a sequence. All of that falls under there. Phonological awareness, okay, is recognizing and understanding all the different sounds of language and learning how to make them and eventually associate them with letters further down the road. Print awareness kind of encompasses a few things. First of all, it is recognizing that print means something even before they are actually able to read and understand what it means. But they see print and they know that that does mean something to someone. And it also eventually leads to letter recognition and sight word recognition. Print awareness also includes understanding how books work, how you hold a book, learning to go from front to back, left to right, top to bottom. So all of that is print awareness. Vocabulary is pretty self-explanatory, learning what different words mean and building a large working vocabulary. The more words that a child knows, the easier it will be for them to learn to read later. And background knowledge is basically what the child knows about the world around them. So this is, different concepts, information, facts, relationships, all that kind of thing. So the more a child knows about the world around them, the easier it will be for them to learn to read later as well. By having a good knowledge of the world and how things work and a large working vocabulary, it makes it easier for children to decode words, use contextual clues to figure out what things mean, and makes them better able to understand and guess the meaning of words. And then finally, print motivation. And this is the one that I really focus on and think is the most important at this age. And print motivation means developing an appreciation for books and for reading, for enjoying reading, for recognizing that reading is not only a source of information, but also a source of entertainment. And it is really important to develop this at a young age, and this will help them throughout their lives, to be lifelong learners and to be able to use books to help them relate to the world or to escape from the world or to explore the world in ways they aren't able to. And without print motivation and an appreciation for reading, it's very difficult for them to develop all the other skills, and they're more likely to struggle with learning to read later on. So these are the skills. And next come the practices. So these are the things that we can do every day to help develop the skills. And they are talk, sing, play, write, and read. So as you see, these are much more straightforward than the actual jargon describing the skills, and the practices is really all you need to focus on. And these are simple everyday things, and you're probably doing a lot of these already. Okay, talking with children is very important. By talking, they get to hear and practice using the sounds and structure of language. They pick up vocabulary, a background knowledge. They also learn what the communication norms are for the culture that they're in, within their family, within their community. They learn storytelling skills, how to relay information, and the normal order, that there is a beginning, a middle, and an end. Now, the way we talk with children is very important, and if you notice, I said with children. You want to be sure you're talking with them, not at them. And there are a lot of things you can do, and like I said, these are some things you probably do all the time anyway without realizing that they are actually helping to develop their early literacy skills. An easy thing you can do is to just talk about and describe what you're doing while you're cooking dinner, folding laundry, grocery shopping, doing yard work, working on the car, when you're out going for a walk or going for a drive, running your errands. You can point out objects and animals and people that you see, point out signs and other functional print. Tell them what it says and what it means, and that helps them develop that print awareness. Ask questions, but one thing to be sure to remember is that you need to give the child time to respond. It takes children significantly longer than adults to process the question they've been asked, formulate an answer, and get it out of their mouth. And this can be sometimes an uncomfortable pause to an adult, and it makes adults tend to want to finish children's sentences or answer questions for them. But it is very important to resist that urge and just give them the extra time to respond. And then if they really can't come up with an answer, then you can give them another hint or ask the question a different way and help them come up with an answer, but be sure you've given them plenty of time to respond first. Other things that you can do is, of course, answer the questions they have and encourage them to ask questions and explore and wonder about things. I know sometimes we can get a little tired of all the why not, what happens if kind of questions, but those are so important for children to learn, and it's important to encourage and indulge them when they do that. And as you're talking with them, you can expand on what they say and extend the topic. For an example, if they point out a flower while you're out going for a walk, you can say, yes, that is a flower. That is a yellow flower. And bees and butterflies need flowers for their food. So you can add to what they say and encourage them to say something else. So remember, you want it to be a conversation. And even if you are talking to an infant or a child that is not verbal yet, be sure that you are still carrying it on in a conversational way. Even if they can't actually answer you, still pause and wait as though they are, and then respond as though they did answer you. And this can be a little awkward at first, but if you're like me and had pets before you had children and talk to your pets all the time, it comes very naturally. And so don't feel bad if it feels a little awkward at first, but just keep it up. And before you know it, they will start babbling and smiling in response. And the older they get, the easier it is. Right, the next thing is singing. And singing is important because it often slows down the language. It breaks up words and phrases in a little bit different way than when we're speaking, so they get to hear different syllables and different sounds emphasized that they might not hear as clearly in spoken language. Songs often have words that we might not use every day in our normal spoken language. Singing helps develop listening skills, and it incorporates rhythm and rhyme, and as I said, already mentioned, vocabulary. It is Now, a lot of adults are uncomfortable with singing because they don't have great singing voices, but please don't let that stop you. As you will see in a little bit, I do not have the greatest singing voice, but out of the hundreds of kids I've seen in story time, I have never had one complain about my singing, and most of them are not the greatest singers either. So it's just important to be enthusiastic and expressive. So when you're singing, it's good to incorporate a variety of songs. You can do traditional children's songs like Mary Had a Little Lamb, Old MacDonald Had a Farm, London Bridges, things like that. You can sing more contemporary songs or listen to recorded music. There are a number of really good children's performers now, like Lori Berkner, Rafi, Jim Gill, and there's several others. So you can sing along with their music. Also contemporary music, and you can find some family-friendly versions of those as well. Uh, Use a variety of styles and tempos, some fast songs, some slow songs, funny songs, dramatic songs, sweet songs, lullabies, a little bit of everything. You can also adapt familiar tunes to new themes. So you can take, say, the tune of a traditional song that everyone knows, like The Wheels on the Bus, and you can adapt it to something else. And this is one thing I do a lot in story time. Since I am not the best singer, these simple children's songs are the easiest for me, so I tend to use the same handful of tunes and just use a lot of different words. So like instead of the wheels on the bus go round and round, if you're talking about animals, you could say the cow in the field goes moo, 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 moo. So, and the traditional children's songs are usually very easy to adapt to different words like that. Another thing to do is to use different tunes for the ABC song. Many people don't realize it, but the tune we traditionally use is actually the same tune for Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P. But you can use different tunes like London Bridge, This Old Man, Mary Had a Little Lamb. And when you use a different tune, it emphasizes different letters. So with the traditional Twinkle Twinkle Little Star tune, you notice we tend to rush through elemental P, and many children don't really get those as distinct separate letters. So when you use different tunes, they get to hear them a little differently. So for example, if we sung it to the tune of London Bridge, it would sound something like this. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. So it sounds a little differently. And once they learn the ABCs, they tend to just kind of sing it automatically, relying a lot on muscle memory and not really thinking about what they're singing. So when you sing it to different tunes, it forces them to really pay attention and think about it a little more. So when you're singing, you want to encourage them to participate. You need to participate, use a lot of expression. You can make it more fun by incorporating movement, like clapping and stomping, dancing. You can use the movement scarves, egg shakers. Kids love the egg shakers, or other instruments. They particularly like the jingle bells. So anything you can do to make it more fun and mix it up is great. And repetition is really important in learning new things. So a child will need to hear a song on average of 3 or 4 times before they really learn it. So when you introduce a new song, try to do it at least 2 or 3 times. And you can sing the same favorite songs over and over. There's nothing wrong with that, and just occasionally introduce something new. And you can let them choose and just experiment. Now, playing. Playing is one thing that seems to be greatly undervalued in today's society. And unfortunately, the current educational curricula does not recognize the developmental importance of play. But play is how young children learn. Play is the work of childhood. During play, they get to use so many skills, and it really helps their development in so many areas besides early literacy skills. But during play, they're using their imagination and creativity. They use their expressive language as they're telling stories and playing their roles and parts. They're using narrative skills. When they are using one object and pretending it's something else, that's using symbolic thinking, which comes into play later on in math, believe it or not. They are often using problem-solving skills in a very concrete way, with having to learn to take turns and play with others, and also in a more abstract way. They may use play to deal with their fears and things that are concerning them in a safe environment where they have control. And of course, through play, they get to have interaction with other children, with their caregivers, and that develops their social skills and their confidence. So there are a lot of different kinds of play, and some lend themselves better in certain environments than other. Dramatic play is a really great one that works on so many skills, with their creativity, narrative skills, learning to work with others, working through problems and situations and fears in a safe, controlled environment. Playing games, they're learning to follow rules, taking turns, and later on, games that require, for example, drawing a card and either reading questions or reading instructions and following them is a great way to sneak in a little extra reading and literacy practice when they're older. Flannel boards are one thing kids really love. They think it's just magical the way the felt sticks to the flannel. And you can either buy pre-made sets and really nice flannel boards, or you can make your own. You can simply take a piece of really sturdy cardboard and cut a piece of flannel from an old worn out sheet or pillowcase and just pull it tight around it and staple it to the back. You can buy multicolored felt from a variety of sources and cut your own simple shapes and figures. You can use clip art or coloring sheets as patterns. You can buy some really nice elaborate sets online as well, and these can be used in a number of ways. They're great for storytelling, so instead of reading a book, you might use a felt set to tell a story, and this is a great way to adapt stories that are a little bit too long or too detailed for the age, and you can simplify it and retell it this way. Children love to play with them to tell their own stories. They can use them to retell a story that they were just read, or they can use it to make up their own stories. You can just simply cut out a bunch of different shapes and let them put them together and practice naming their shapes and colors, or cut out letters. All kinds of things you can do with those, and it's a fairly inexpensive way to give them something to do, and they're great for a rainy day. Building sets are another thing that builds several developmental skills. It works on their fine motor skills, problem solving skills, and they learn to work together. And there's a lot of great things, blocks, Legos, of course, Magnetiles. We have those at the library where I work, and they are super popular. The kids love those. And there are several other nice building sets. Lakeshore Learning is a great supplier of really neat building sets for kids, so you might check that out. And of course, outdoor time, gym time, free play time are all very important too. They need to run and jump and do gross motor play as well. So never underestimate the importance of play. It's never a waste of time. And now to writing. Now this is one that we really, at this age, we don't actually mean writing. We mean working on skills that will help them with their writing later on. So these are pre-writing activities that develop hand strength, fine motor control, and they can also use them to work on their letter knowledge and print awareness. Some of the activities that you can use are, of course, scribbling and drawing are the most obvious, and this gives them practice learning to hold a writing instrument, whether they're using crayons or pencils or markers. And when they're very young, will just do some random scribbling, a lot of very circular scribbling. As they get older, they will start to make shapes and then make letter-like forms that aren't actual letters, but where they're trying to imitate the look of letters. And then eventually they will start writing actual letters. And when they first start learning to make their letters and write words, you'll notice a lot of letters are written backwards, and that is perfectly normal development, nothing to worry about at all. Drawing pictures still uses many of the same skills, so drawing is also a pre-writing activity. One of the best things you can do to work on hand strength is Play-Doh. And you can either buy commercial Play-Dohs or clays, or you can make your own salt dough with just salt, flour, and water, which is very economical, and you can just throw it away when it gets nasty. Another activity that is great for fine motor skills is sorting small objects. By using their pincher grasp, or even using a pair of tweezers to pick up objects and sort them. They're not only working on fine motor skills, they're also working on concepts such as shape, color, or size, or whatever characteristics they are sorting on. And sorting is also a pre-math and science activity. Finger plays and action rhymes are great for motor skills. The action rhymes tend to be a little more gross motor, which still helps with overall coordination and proprioception, which is kind of knowing where their body is in space. And that tends to be more things like moving up and down, raising their hands in the air, clapping, waving, stomping, things like that. Finger plays as the name says, focus mainly on using the fingers, and these are typically like all your 5 little and 10 little something rhymes and songs. And when you do these, you want to use a variety of counting up and counting down. And one thing I like to do when I do a 5 little something rhyme or song is we'll do it with one hand first, which is usually going to be their dominant hand, and then I will tell them to put that hand behind their back, and then we'll do it a second time using the other hand. So you need to be sure that you work both hands. And then when doing the 10 little somethings, once we count up, then I always do it a second time counting down, because they get so used to counting up, it comes much easier. And after a while, they are doing it just on muscle memory and not really even thinking about what they're doing. But when they count down and they're counting their fingers down, that doesn't come as easy. They have to concentrate a lot more, and it's working those muscles and those neural connections a little different way. So you want to be sure you do that. Use both hands and count up and count down. Another thing that helps with pre-writing and working on letter recognition is handling letter shapes. So you can have blocks with letters on them. You can have, wooden or foam letters. They can practice making letters with their Play-Doh when they're working with that. Tracing letters either on paper. And there are also board books that actually have kind of like little channels in the letters where they can trace along. And another fun activity for tracing and practicing letters is to take a container that's kind of big, not too big, but big enough for them to get their hand in comfortably. And if it is either a dark colored container or a clear or translucent container, and you can put different colored sheets of construction paper underneath, and then just put a shallow layer of salt in the bottom, and they can take their finger and practice making letters in the salt, and then where they have their finger has traced, they will be able to see the color underneath the salt so show through. And then once they make a letter, then you can just shake the salt, and then it's ready to make another one. And if you have a long container and they have a shorter name, they could even practice writing their whole name. Then as they get older, once they really start to know their letters and can make some of them, then they will learn writing their name, and you will see that they quickly become very proud of that, and they like putting their name on all of their papers and taking ownership of everything they've created and seeing their name. So when they are able to encourage them to do that. And now to reading, and this one we'll spend a little bit more time on. So reading together is the single most important activity to prepare a child for learning to read and being a lifelong reader later. And a child's interest in reading is a good predictor of later academic achievement. By reading together, you're helping them develop that love and appreciation for reading and books, that print motivation. And reading helps develop all their early literacy skills. Now, there are 3 basic types of reading. The first one is the lap read one-on-one, which is typically what a parent will do with their child. Independent reading, where the child has time to look at books alone, and then a group read aloud, where an adult is reading to several different children. And this is typically what you're going to see in the classroom or daycare environment or in library story times. Though if you have several children, you might also do a group read aloud in a similar way at home. And it is important that children get a chance to do all of these because they're all a little bit different. And a lap read, when you're one-on-one, you can usually read longer books. They can be a little bit more involved. The illustrations can be smaller, more detailed, don't have to be as easily visible since the child is right there looking at it. You can get more involved. The child has a chance to talk more about the book and ask questions and make comments, and so you really get to explore the book. And in independent reading, of course, the child is not actually reading yet, but they can look at the pictures and tell the story from the pictures. If it's a story they've heard before, especially if they've heard it several times, they may actually have the words memorized, and they may know what the words on each page say, even though they can't read them yet. They have memorized them. But that memorization and association helps them start to eventually recognize sight words later on. And of course, they get to practice, learning how to use a book, how books work, turning the pages, learning to appreciate and respect books. So that's important that they have that time and have, plenty of good books to choose from. And then a group read aloud is a little bit different because with several children, you may have a broad range of ages, and attention span. So you typically need to use books that are shorter, that have less text per page. The illustrations usually need to be simple and large and bright and bold so everyone can see them from a distance. So all this type of reading is important, and they're all a little bit different. And one thing to keep in mind is, particularly with younger children, is they may not have the ability to sit still on your lap or in the floor in front of you and listen. If you have a child like that who just is not capable of sitting still to look at a book or listen to a book, don't worry about it. Don't try to force it. Just keep books available so that they can look at them on their own when they want to. Let them see you reading. If you have an older child, you can read to them while the younger child is in the room. And even when they're moving around and very active, you would be surprised at how much they absorb. And in a library story time, we have story times for all ages, and we do not expect the younger kids to just sit there and listen quietly. That's not a developmentally appropriate expectation, and some kids just are not capable of doing that until they're much older. So it's okay if they're up moving around. You can still try to read to them or even have audiobooks playing in the background as they play. Now, we'll talk about some of the different things to think about when selecting books for different ages for babies and young toddlers. Particularly for books for them to look at and handle on their own. You want to have primarily cloth books or board books. There are also some kind of plastic books, but these are things that have rounded corners and sturdy pages that can tolerate being handled roughly, being mouthed and chewed on. A lot of baby and toddler books have interactive elements like lift a flap, where they can lift up a flap, open a door, and find something behind it. The touch and feel books are really popular, where they have all different kinds of textures for the child to feel, from rough, scratchy things to fluffy things to bumpy things or sticky things. These are really, really great to get all that sensory input at this age. Mirrors are also great, as babies and young toddlers love looking at other babies, including themselves. And some books have sound effects. And I will just give a little caveat. Some babies are very sensitive to certain sounds, and while many kids love books that have sound effects, some kids absolutely do not like them or do not like certain sounds. So just be cognizant of that, and if you find your child doesn't like certain sounds, then just don't use them, and that's perfectly fine. Illustrations for this age need to be very simple, high contrast. For young babies, you typically just have things that are very high contrast, black and white patterns, possibly black, white, and red at the most. As they get older, then they incorporate more colors, and you'll have very simple, recognizable drawings or paintings, or actual photos of everyday objects and people, and particularly other babies and toddlers, because as I said, they love looking at other babies and toddlers. They will generally have very little text on each page, just one or two words, maybe a phrase. in very large print. And as you can see in the picture, you see we have a very simple illustration of just the elephant in bright colors, the bold, heavy outline with, it looks like 2 words on the page, and not a lot of other distracting details. So this makes it a lot easier for them to perceive what they're looking at. Now when we get to older toddlers and preschoolers, you're still going to look for interactive elements, but they'll be a little bit different. They still like lift-a-flaps, and pop-ups are hugely popular with all kids, but you're also going to look for things just within the story that make it interactive, such as actions the character is doing that the children can do along with them, repeated lines that occur over and over that encourage the kids to actually participate in telling the story and saying those lines themselves. Ask the children questions about what's going on in the story. Point to different objects to ask them to identify the object or colors or shapes or other concepts, and ask them to make predictions about what's going to happen next, or how do you think the character feels? Why do you think the character feels that way? And then at the end of the story, you might talk about, what else could the character have done differently? And anything that can get them really engaged with the book. And we'll see some examples I've shown. Count the Monkeys is a very funny book that has the book actually directs the child to do different actions. Pete the Cat is one that's very short and simple and very repetitive, so the kids all join in. But did Pete cry? Goodness, no. And Brown Bear, again, is a very repetitive book, and it also has the animals to identify and colors to identify. So many books will have, multiple characteristics you can use. And some other things to look for in books for older toddlers and preschoolers are to have a good rhythm when read aloud. Now, some books will rhyme, they don't have to, but they do need to have a good rhythm when you read them aloud. Look for books that introduce some new vocabulary or concepts. And again, you're still wanting to stick with illustrations that are brightly colored, not too busy, and particularly if you're doing a group read aloud, they need to be very, big and bold and simple. Now, if you're doing a lap read, then your illustrations don't necessarily have to be so bright, and they can have a little more detail. You want them to be age appropriate in content and length so that the concepts in the plot of the story aren't too sophisticated, or things they can relate to and understand. You don't want it to be too long, and that's going to vary a little bit from child to child. And children like funny books at this age, but the humor needs to be fairly simple and obvious. They don't really get more sophisticated humor like puns and other wordplay. And it's great to have books with diverse characters. Children need to be able to see not only people that are like them and like their family and their community, they need to be able to see children and families that are different from them as well. So they need to see people that live both in the suburbs, in the country, in the city. They need to see different races, different ethnicities. They need to see old people, young people, people with different body types, people with different abilities. So all these, different things that make up our society, they need to see in their books, presented in just an everyday matter-of-fact way. And as I mentioned before, and having a good rhyme and rhythm, sometimes rhyming comes into that. A lot of children's books do rhyme. They don't have to, but rhyming does, help them a little bit with the phonological awareness. And then the other thing is alliteration, whereas rhyming is when words have the same ending sound. Alliteration is when you have several words in a row that have the same beginning sound. A lot of tongue twisters have alliteration, such as she sells seashells by the seashore. Most of the words in that start with an S sound. And in the book shown Rotten and Rascal, the two terrible pterosaur twins. This book has a lot of alliteration in it like that. So that's another thing that calls attention to different sounds and works on that phonological awareness. And the most important thing is that the book should interest the child. A lot of times parents come in and ask us to suggest, good books for their child. And well, really the best book is one that the child is interested in. You can pull a book that has won all kinds of literary and illustrator awards, but these awards are based on what adults like and what adults think. They really don't consider the appeal to children. So if it doesn't interest the child, it doesn't matter how many awards it's won. And there could be a book that almost every child likes, but if your child doesn't like it, then it's not going to do much good. So look for things that appeal to their interest and things that are going on in their life or things they like to learn about. Books for older children, so say getting into, pre-K, kindergarten, first grade. They can be longer depending on the child. You could have several lines of text per page. The illustrations can be more detailed or complex. The language, plot, and humor can also be more sophisticated because now they have, greater vocabulary. They know more about the world around them. They've had more life experience. And they have greater cognitive ability, so they can handle a little more sophistication. Again, interactive elements are great for every age, and children this age really seem to be drawn to things that relate to their everyday situations. So things like a new baby in the family, getting along with siblings, starting preschool or starting kindergarten, issues at school, issues with friends, issues that deal with breaking rules and facing consequences. And so they're starting to deal with all these things, and they really like being able to relate to the characters in the story. So at this age, they may still be reading picture books or still enjoy being read to from picture books. There are some picture books that are great for this age. They may be starting with beginning readers if they know a few sight words, and they may, depending on their attention span, they might enjoy being read to from short chapter books, because children can typically understand language that is a higher level than what they are able to read themselves. So once they're in kindergarten or first grade, listening to read alouds from chapter books or audio books work really well and exposes them to more advanced language. And then tips for reading aloud. You want to make sure that the child can see the pictures, which is usually not an issue when they're on your lap, but if you're doing a group read aloud, you want to be sure you're holding the book out where all the kids get to see the picture. When you come across a word that you think your child or the children won't be familiar with, the temptation is to replace it with a more familiar word, but please don't do that. Instead, just pause and quickly explain the word, and then at the end of the story, you might want to come back and discuss it a little more. But that's how they learn new words. So don't replace them, explain them. Continue, to engage them in the story by asking questions, pointing out things, asking them to make predictions. As you're reading, you don't want to read in a monotone voice. Be expressive. And if you can do different voices for different characters, use a lot of, expression, modulate your tone. And be sure you pause every now and then to ask them a question to draw them into the story or answer their questions. And you can encourage the child to tell the story from the pictures. You can either start that way and first go through the pictures and discuss them, or you can wait and after the story let them retell the story using the pictures. And again, you want to read books that the child or children are interested in. This is an example of what we call exploring a book. So it uses a lot of different activities that tie into the story to extend it. So this story is called Hooray for Hat by Brian Wan, and in this story, Elephant wakes up really grumpy, but then he gets a surprise package at the door that contains the most magnificent hat you've ever seen, which is actually made up of several hats put together, and that immediately cheers him up. So he runs to tell his friends one by one, but as it turns out, each of them is having a bad day too and has woken up very grumpy. So he gives them each a hat from his, and that cheers them up. Throughout the story, they over and over cheer, hooray for hat. So that's a repeating element that the children can join in. They can sing the song if you're happy and you know it, talk about different feelings, draw different facial expressions that show those feelings. And since all the characters in this book are animals, you can talk about the different animals, identify them, what sound they make, learn about where they come from. And of course, with anything, you can point out colors and other objects. You can make your own hat and have your own Hooray for Hat parade. Make hats for your stuffed animals too. And then finally, many times if you go to an author's website, you may find additional activities or printables that go along with their book. So be sure to check that out. All right, your public library can be a great source of help. Now, depending on the library, the services and things available may vary, but all public libraries are going to have story times for different ages, from babies all up to school age. And in story time, you'll get a chance to see the children's librarians model a lot of the different early literacy practices. If you're a new parent and you're still not quite sure or not comfortable with everything, that's a great way to see them modeled and get a chance to talk to your librarian. They often have informational brochures available about literacy, or with bibliographies, list of suggested books. The children's librarians can make recommendations and help you select books for your child based on what they're interested in and what their attention span is. The library has many digital resources, so be sure to go to your library's website and explore it. You can usually access your library's catalog through their website, so you can sit in the comfort of your own home and shop for books and put them on hold. Many libraries have curbside pickup, especially now in a post-COVID-19 world. At least for the time being, nearly all libraries will be offering some type of curbside pickup in order to minimize how many people are in the library. And this is really great for parents with young children. That way you don't have to drag all the kids out of the car just to go in and pick up some books real quick. Or if the kids are sleeping, you can just pull up and someone will bring your books out to you. There are many digital resources that some libraries have. Bookflix is one. That's a great one where there are digital books that they pair a fiction, a story, and a nonfiction book, and it will actually read the book to the child, and the child can follow the text along with the narrator. So that's really great, especially if you're busy. There are ebooks for kids that your library may have. Oftentimes teachers can put in materials requests. So say you're doing a lesson on dinosaurs and you can submit a request saying, I need so many, picture books or nonfiction books or whatever about dinosaurs for this age. And with enough notice, the staff can get them together for you. So all you have to do is come in and pick them up. And many libraries will do this for homeschooling families as well. So just explore your library's website and talk to your children's librarian about all the different services that they have that can help you. Some other resources are the earlylit.net website that belongs to Sarosh Goding. She is an expert in early literacy, particularly in applying it to library story times. But her website has a wealth of information on literacy and many handouts and printables and brochures and parent information. It's really, really a great site. And if you ever have the opportunity to attend one of her workshops, I highly recommend it. Another site is getreadytoread.org, has information on early literacy. The Colorado Libraries has a great site explaining in detail the 6 early literacy skills if you want to know more about the child development side and the theory on that. 0 to 3 is a good site for kids this age, and this particular article is what we know about early literacy and language development. There is a blog article on dialogic reading, which is a particular way of active reading with your child that engages higher level thinking and has a very high level of engagement versus more passive reading. And then finally, the site with the 10 ways to explore a book. And I showed you one example with the Hooray for Hat book. This site has the same sheets with all the examples for 2 other books. It's a great thing to check out, and it will give you ideas of how to expand and extend other books as well. Right? So, and this is all I have. I hope you found this helpful, and if you have any questions or comments, feel free to contact me. You can always contact me through my blog at adventuresinstorytime.com. My email link is on there, but my email is adventuresinstorytime@gmail.com. So you can email me directly if you'd like, or leave a comment below. So again, thank you for listening, and I hope you found this helpful. Happy reading!